The year was 1869 when Henry George, then a young journalist, came from California to New York. He was in New York on business trying to get telegraph service for the small paper he worked for. That effort was a failure, but while he was in New York, he was struck by the extreme contrast between the immense wealth he could see in that city, somewhere over there, and the abject poverty literally side by side with it. This clarified in his mind the nature of what could be called the poverty problem, namely, how is it that poverty persists and even deepens as civilizations get better and better able to produce wealth? This was the problem he was mulling over in his mind when he returned to California.
It was in California, in the hills outside San Francisco, that George had his central insight. This was in the late summer of 1870, about 5 years after the end of the Civil War, and about a year after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. The country was still in the throes of the Panic and Depression of 1869. George had gone out riding, and years later remembered the moment this way. Absorbed in my own thoughts, I had driven the horse into the hills until he panted. Stopping for breath, I asked a passing teamster, for want of anything better to say, what land was worth there. He pointed to some cows grazing so far off that they looked like mice, and said, "I don't know exactly, but there is a man over there who will sell some land for $1,000 an acre," which in those days was a huge sum. Like a flash, it came upon me that there was the reason for advancing poverty with advancing wealth. With the growth of population, land grows in value, and the men who work it must pay more for the privilege. I turned away amidst quiet thought to the perception that then came to me and has been with me ever since. That's probably an understatement. In the years following that insight, George worked out in his head and in a number of writings a comprehensive understanding of the workings of the world in its economic aspect. George was only a locally known journalist before the insight, but afterward he became a household name around the world. His books sold in the millions of copies. His admirers included Leo Tolstoy, the Chinese statesman Sun Yat-sen, Albert Einstein, the young George Bernard Shaw, the young Clarence Darrow, the young Winston Churchill, though Shaw and Darrow and Churchill did turn away from George's thinking later in their careers. George remained widely known until well into the first half of the 20th century, though he is largely unknown in the general population today. All of George's thinking and public speaking is centered around his core insight, namely that private property in land, giving rise to private land monopoly, is the injustice at the heart of the poverty problem. As civilizations advance in wealth-producing power, for example through technological improvement or the growth of population in areas that are not yet settled, or education, the owners of large or otherwise hugely valuable tracts of land reap the benefit at the expense of the general public. If you read him, you may find, in addition to his eloquence as a writer, that you can no longer accept as valid many of the tenets of conventional economics.